Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to introduce you to this Mitchell Institute's Schriever Spacepower series. I'm Jennifer Reeves, Senior Resident Fellow at the Mitchell Institute Spacepower Center of Excellence. Today, the United States Space Force is working to integrate space capabilities across global operations in an era of strategic competition with peer adversaries. Since its establishment in 2019, the Space Force has steadily expanded its presence in combatant commands worldwide, ensuring that space power is effectively incorporated into joint warfighting. The challenges in Europe and Africa are particularly complex, from supporting NATO allies and Ukraine to countering regional threats in Africa, all while developing space capabilities with partner nations. Given all this, I am thrilled to have with me a great Space Force leader who is currently addressing these challenges. Brigadier General Jacob Middleton is the Commanding General of U.S. Space Forces Europe and Africa. In this role, he leads Space Force efforts to support both U.S. European Command and U.S. Africa Command, spanning an AOR from Iceland to South Africa. Since taking command in August 2024, when the component was elevated to a one-star command, he has worked to integrate space capabilities into theater operations and develop crucial partnerships with allies. General Middleton, sir, thanks for making the trip and taking the time to be here with us today. First, let me turn it over to you for some perspectives.
Well, thank you, Jen. First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. Mitchell Institute and the Air Force Air and Space Association is important to everything we do. You know, most of us came from the Air Force, so I appreciate the opportunity. So I think a lot of the questions we get centered around, I think three things. You know, why was the Space Force created? We have U.S. Space Command out there who we're good partners with, and we need to work with as we integrate space into the warfight. And then the component, you know, why we started with components. So I know we have a few questions we're going to cover, but those are the three topics that you're going to hear interlaced through there. You already talked about the fact that the component is fairly new. And from a resourcing standpoint, we're growing. So I will touch on just the great work and support that we get from all the agencies of the government, but particularly the folks, as you know, who work as part of the command. So looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, super. Okay, well, let's get after it. So last August, Space Forces Europe and Africa was elevated, as we said, from a colonel-led organization to a one-star command with your appointment, which is very cool. So this command elevation comes at a time when space integration is becoming increasingly critical to joint operations. So can you lay out for us what your role is and why the Space Force has prioritized placing its admittedly limited number of general officers as component commanders?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I took over for Colonel Max Gonzo Lance, who did an outstanding job and got us on the right path. But as you know, the Department of Defense, we're hierarchical. It is a military organization, so I'll use my own personal experience. You know, I came in the Air Force as an E3, as an A1C, and now a one-star. There's a significant difference between an A1C and a one-star. And so it matters, rank matters. And really what it matters for us is that it cuts down the time in getting after things that we need to get after and working with the other agencies to bring an understanding of what space is. So that's one of the things that we're working on that I got from the UCOM and AFRICOM commanders is we primarily are focused on right now making sure that we train, educate, and then do the right exercises so people understand what we bring to the fight, and working with Space Command to integrate those capabilities. So it was significant, and it was a significant investment on the behalf of by the CSO, General Saltzman, to do that, but also necessary to work with the joint staff and joint forces and integrate space.
So what's it like across the table? Who are your peers from the other services? Are they 1-stars like you? Are they higher? Are they lower?
That's a great question. They're all 4-stars right now.
Oh.
And so, but they're all great. They get a lot of advice, a lot of wisdom coming from there, and a lot of support coming from the combatant commanders. So General Grenkowicz, General Langley, and General Cavoli, prior to General Grenkowicz, has been very supportive in that. But there is a rank disparity between me as a component commander and the others, but they've been very helpful in integrating, so it hasn't been a problem.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Getting things done. That's the
getting
important
things
thing.
done. Yeah.
So, but often, commanders of terrestrial operations, kind of like we're talking about, they may not fully recognize how their operations depend on space, right? And I actually remember you talking about this in an earlier conference, that a lot of times in planning and briefs, there's just an assumption that space will handle it, right? So can you walk us through what some of these critical dependencies look like, and then how you're helping these other component commanders who outrank you understand what their reliance on space assets is, what their reliance is, but then, you know, what can space do, what can't it do? How do those conversations go?
So I'll steal from Space Operations Command. They have a great example of this when it comes to how we organize around space. And so the first thing is that when you look back in World War II to the present, we operate, train, equip, and recruited without space. So the numbers of people we needed were larger, more equipment, so on and so forth. Space offers, for space capabilities across the board, from an information standpoint, something that you just can't get from the other domains. And so what it allows you to do, answering the question, why Space Force, it allows you to get after the political objectives in the most efficient way possible. And if things deteriorate to conflict, we're able to achieve those political objectives with the least amount of lives lost on both sides. The problem is that people, I would say space, we've done our job so well that people don't know what they're dependent on. And I'm not going to throw any of my fellow component commanders under the bus, but I'll use some civilian examples. I don't know if you heard me give this example. I was on a plane the other day, and the individual was coming through, and like they normally do, asked, "Can I get you something to drink?" And the guy a couple of rows in front of me was upset, and he was, "Can I get you something to drink?" And he yelled out, "No, I can get some Wi-Fi." We were like 20,000 feet in the air. I don't know what he had to send who he had to send an email to, but that was important to me. I wanted to lean over and be like, "I can get you some space for that." Like, hello, I do part of that. But it is normal for people not to understand. For us, though, when you're doing campaign level planning, it is important for all the components to understand those dependencies, because, like it or not, the adversary is trying to take that advantage away from us. So understanding how the advantage we have in space will help us defend that advantage.
Okay, cool. So, so like you've said, and those of us who know space recognize that space doesn't respect, of course, traditional boundaries, right? Certainly that are terrestrial or geographic. Lots of examples, not just where services, of course, cross boundaries, but threats as well. And so how does Space Forces Europe and Africa coordinate with other space components like Space Forces Central, Space Forces Space? How do you guys work together to actually create better effects, create more synergistic effects?
Oh, that's a great question. So as you just pointed out, we do in space have the ability to bring effects from one theater into another theater. The important part of that is coordination. And so if I'm looking at CENTCOM and they need some support, we still follow the traditional joint forces, joint staff model. So the way that would work in the case of like CENTCOM, they would need some support that they can't provide themselves. They would go through the J3 and CENTCOM to the UCOM J3, eventually make his way to me. And I will coordinate with what was Colonel Putman, and I think soon to be Todd Benson, to make sure that we meet the timing and tempo of what they're looking for. From a Space Command standpoint, who from a unified command plan are responsible for 100K and above, always coordinate with General Chess. So if I'm taking any action that may remotely be of interest to him, I will pick up the phone and call him. But we all have like a standing week or bi-weekly discussion just to make sure we're up to speed. But I would argue that the support that we provide from a execution standpoint is probably no different than any other domain. It's just that space can reach across into other combat commands a lot easier and quicker than those tools in other domains.
Yeah, the very nature of it.
By the very nature of what we do.
Okay, well, let's get some more specific into your areas of responsibility, because you have Europe, not just Europe, but you also have Africa, the entire African continent. And that's really a region that's often under-discussed when it comes to space integration. So what are you finding some of the unique challenges or opportunities that you're dealing with when it comes to engaging with, supporting any of our partners, our partner operations in Africa with space, right? We don't hear about it a lot, so I'm sure everyone's very interested.
So I don't know if it's more unique from AFRICOM to EUCOM. The mission is different. AFRICOM, I would argue, is probably the nexus of things that impact the rest of the globe. I don't think people realize that the battle for opinions and support with those countries there is not settled yet, and so there is a competition going on there. Between our partners and allies and those who disagree with us. At the end of the day, it still comes down to, I think, the three things of training, exercise, and education. We all have limited resources. I would argue that, and I think people would agree that the U.S. budget is pretty good, but it's still limited. When you talk to commanders, they never have enough things. What space provides is a way to efficiently utilize those resources. So for example, if there's a flood somewhere and you have limited resources, understanding where the flood is, what's the worst area of your country and how to prioritize those resources are important. Space can do that at a speed that can't be done by any other domain. These are the things that we offer, not just our African partners, but also are available to our EUCOM partners also. So the difference, I would argue, is that this sovereign concerns. And so when you're talking like just historically and you're looking at the European countries, their sovereign concerns are historically different from the African countries. And so, and that's important. So we respect everybody's right to do, every country's right to support their sovereign concerns, but we also try to meet in the middle with the things that we all agree to, especially when it comes to partners. And with allies, we have treaties, so that makes it a little bit easier. And for the African countries, we are empowering them to do things that they need to do to get after their concerns on their own.
Can I ask you to go a little deeper on that? Just
for
the sovereign concerns, right? How, just if you maybe had an example or a story, Africa versus Europe, and how those might be different.
Yeah. So the difference I think I see between us as Americans and Europe is that their history goes back centuries. And so when you're talking to them, they're talking about a time period and you're like, yeah, we don't go back that far, right? But it's important. So every invasion matters to them. And so even in an alliance, the first thing they're thinking about is those historical scars and how to not repeat that, how to not get back into that. And because it's Europe, just like Africa, there is now a continental or European concern, and that's where the similarities come in. And so whenever you're talking to them, they're gonna, any country, they're gonna talk about the importance of existing, how do they continue to exist. But there's also similarities that then go regionally and then all of Europe, if that makes sense. And so I'm hesitant to bring up any particular country.
That's fair.
But they all have their own history that's important, that plays into their decisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then actually let's bring up one country from EUCOM, and that is Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine has demonstrated the critical nature of space-enabled capabilities, right? We saw that from the onset. Communications, PNT. Both sides are really playing a bit of a cat and mouse game to try and degrade each other's space capabilities. I mean, from the beginning, we've seen that this is critical. So what are you seeing as some of the largest lessons learned from Ukraine, especially when it comes to how the ground and link segments are important, right? We tend to forget about that. I mean, space guys and also everyone else thinks that space systems are purely in space, but of course we know that space systems have their segments that are on the ground and the links that connect them. So what are we seeing is getting targeted and lessons that we can learn from this pure conflict? And what are your best practices that you're coming up with?
Well, so I think the most important thing is the resiliency piece of it. Like U.S. policy, I think for decades was to view space as a safe haven. Like, we all kind of agreed that we weren't going to do anything in space. Adversaries didn't agree with that approach. And because they didn't agree with that approach and they have a different view of the world, they're trying to take away that advantage. I think what the Ukrainians have learned is how do you maintain that advantage? And you mentioned ground links. So I would argue that in a conflict, it's the adversary's job to take away your advantage and get after those ground links. Ukrainians have figured out ways to be more resilient in that area. And not resilient just through nodes, but having multiple different ways to get the same capability from space. I think General Grinkowicz said it best. When you're talking about innovation, I don't know if there's anything that hones innovation better than combat operations. Because you got to think about why don't we innovate day to day? It's expensive. You don't get it right all the time. When you get it wrong, it costs. But when you get it right, it's very beneficial. When you're in combat operations, there is an incentive to innovate because you don't really have a choice.
Yeah, big motivation.
And so they have the motivation to do that. And so really it just revolves around maintaining what space has and thinking about unique ways to get that capability. And more juice for the squeeze, because in a conflict, every dollar counts more, because losing it definitely means lives lost on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So our European allies are increasingly leaning into the need to protect and defend their on-orbit assets. Germany's Major General Michael Traut recently emphasized the need for more resilient space systems with built-in defensive capabilities against jamming and other threats. Last year, France announced its Yoda satellites that are maneuverable and they are eventually looking to have counter space capabilities. So how is your command working with European allies to not only enhance satellite resilience, but also develop these shared approaches to space?
So that's a great question. So I'll start off with that is a Space Command mission. We're good partners with Space Command, and General Whiting and the folks I work with, General Gibson and General Endicott, are doing a great job with on-orbit defense. And General Dom and General Traut, that is an emphasis item for them. But when it comes to integrating and supporting all combatant commands, and in my case, EUCOM and AFRICOM, we can't do that without U.S. Space Command. So they're working on that piece under their named operation, and they're building that alliance and that coalition. Because as you know, we say America first, but it doesn't mean America alone. And so they're working and pull together that team for on-orbit defense. I am more focused on the theater down to tactical level, which is more of electronic warfare type stuff. But together, we work together with Space Command to make sure we bring the totality of capability that space has to offer. So, and like General Gibson, the U.S. Space Command J5, we talk to the same people, and we're after the same goal, which is space capabilities. So we can't separate one from the other, but a more theater and they're more global.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So now, from a larger, full-blown NATO perspective, they've increasingly placed a greater emphasis on space as an operational domain, but coordination among the capabilities, right, is still a work in progress. So specifically, what do you do in coordinating NATO space efforts? And does your position involve similar command responsibilities for NATO space, similar to those exercised by Lieutenant General Hines as the Deputy Commander of both USAFE and Allied Air Command?
That's a great question. So I don't have any NATO authorities, and NATO is currently working through what they want their space infrastructure to look like in the end. So they are working towards, they have an ops center, and they are putting the structure in place, but there hasn't been a vote on how that's going to look. In the meantime, what that means for the rest of us is we still have a job to do in bringing space capabilities. And so we are still working to educate, train, and exercise with partners and allies to include Space Command in that. And so we're working towards, us and Space Command, an ops center that covers both of our needs. Not sure how that's going to look. It may be one for Space Command, one for us. That may be combined, where we bring in allies. And whenever NATO votes and they decide how this is going to look, the important part of this is that what we're doing needs to be able to plug into whatever NATO as an alliance wants this to look like. But we'll be prepared, regardless of what that decision is. That's not going to hamper our efforts in working with our partners and allies. But it starts with training, education, and exercises.
Oh, that's great. And you're part of that sort of from Jump Street, right? You're in there working through the process, understanding what the requirements are, how we can work it together.
That's right. So, and you mentioned General Hines. So on the Air Command side, all the components are working with space to get a better understanding of what we bring to the table, working into the campaign plan. We work with the GIST, which is the liaison that Space Command has. So we're all working together to get to the right answer on what this should be, and that will just, hopefully plug seamlessly into whatever NATO decides they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's really important. My own independent research, as well as my experience, is that people are very happy when space works.
Yeah.
Right, and it's there and it's integrated into everything. But boy, as we're talking about, not enough people understand what's actually happening in the background.
Yeah.
And particularly now is in our peer adversary world, right? Those things are under threat. And I think it would be very challenging for people to experience, not think about it cognitively, but to experience what would happen if we lost those capabilities.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. I think we have all experienced times when, you're looking at your phone and you go into a place where a GPS is not working. That is frustrating, when you're trying to get from point A to point B during peacetime. It has real significant, life-threatening implications during conflict. And then keep in mind there's an adversary on the other side trying to make sure you don't get to where you need to go. So
Absolutely.
It is a competition here. We are fighting against somebody who's trying to win also.
It's more than that random dude on the airplane trying to send an email.
It is more.
At 20,000 feet.
It is more than that. Yes,
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
So when you first stood up your command, it had about 30 folks. And I'm guessing it maybe hasn't grown too much. I don't know. I want to hear more about it. I'm sure the size of your organization actually impacts your ability to conduct international engagements with the 100+ countries in your AOR. So tell us more about the mechanics. Tell us about how the resourcing helps or hinders. Just tell us about a day in the life of what it's like to be you, making things happen.
Well, so I got to give credit to my team. I mean, you get to a point where they don't let, as an operator, they don't let you operate anything anymore, and they, so it's about the people who've been working really hard. So we are small. And so it just means that you're putting in an enormous amount of work. At the end of the day, over 100 countries, we don't get to say, I'm tired, I don't want to go. I will say this, and I may be wrong about this, but I think that the folks in the component are probably, or at least the only ones I'm aware of, where a combatant commander, 4-star combatant commander, has complimented on their work and how great they're doing, as small as they are. So we have a service chief who's 4-star and 2 combatant commanders, and that's how hard they're working. Also got to give credit to the intelligence community. Once we explain to them, hey, here's why we're here, here's what they need, here's what we need, they've been very supportive. The space staff, General Byrd, and the rest of the team up there on the space staff have been really supportive. So my point is that this is a team effort, and we will get to the point where we are a standalone, full-up round. But it was important that we start now to get people to understand what we bring to the table, because space is just that important. The example I gave at a recent speech to NATO is that and this is a personal opinion I have, like everybody's familiar with Normandy. I think the numbers are like, with partners and allies, we lost like 9,000 in one day. I would like over 9,000. I would like to believe, and I believe in my heart, with space, we could have achieved those political objectives in a shorter amount of time with a lot less lives lost. And so when people say, why Space Force, that's why. It's about achieving the political objectives as quickly as possible with the least amount of lives lost on both sides. So we're trying to save mothers from crying. It's not about just killing, it's about, supporting the national objectives.
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah, and it feels like a bit of an evolution, right? Maybe the stand-up of Space Force was a revolution, but as we continue to grow and understand what the landscape, even inside our own organizations, the bureaucratic landscape, the warfighting landscape on our side, having to figure out how Space Force better fits in there and can be more effective inside those structures, continues to be a growing process.
I agree.
From an observer perspective.
I agree. I think the toughest thing for us was to accept the idea that space was no longer a safe haven. It had been a safe haven for so long that when we realized that our adversaries were no longer respecting that, and they get to make their own decision, that was kind of a shocker. And then when space was created, we overclassified a lot of stuff. And so people didn't understand what was up there, what were their dependencies, and what we were going to do to protect those capabilities. I tell the team who's off screen here that, I did land nav. And I failed land nav. You had to find 5 targets in the woods. I couldn't find it. So I don't want to go back to the time when I'm old, when I can go to the gas station and find a map. Where there were gas stations. I love GPS. But I don't know if everybody realizes that there's no maps and gas stations about everything in the world because of space.
Yes.
Your internet on the plane is because of space. We didn't do a good job of telling people that. Illegal fishing, space, that's how we discovered it. Agricultural, space. ATM transactions, space. And so I don't want to go back, and we just got to do a better job of making sure folks understand what we're protecting.
Cool. No, I think that's super important. Yeah. Super important. So you mentioned classification. I'm going to jog around here and let's talk about classification, because it's near, I wouldn't call it near and dear, but it's definitely near to everyone's heart. So we know that the overclassification and no foreign, it's an issue that has plagued the defense space activities for years. I don't think, though, we certainly talk about it, it gets a lot of press time, but I'm not sure that the rest of us fully understand how this creates very real barriers to Allied cooperation. So can you describe for us why it's important, why breaking it down is absolutely fundamental to our ability to work with our allies and partners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as you know, we don't do anything alone. We work with partners and allies, and so here's what classifications. Here's what it does. I mean, when you classify something, you are saying there's a reason to protect this information, because if I reveal it, however I got the information will now be jeopardized. I may not be able to protect it again. So it's important to have classified information. And it is difficult to determine where you draw that line, because if you get it wrong, you could be jeopardizing national security. What we did culturally in the Space Force is, instead of trying to draw that line exactly where it needs to be, we just overclassified everything. It's easy. Everything's classified. I sharpen a broom handle, turn it into a spear, SAP, classified. That way you don't have to worry about making the hard decision. The problem with that is now I can't go to my partner and go, I got a spear you can use, because it's now classified, which is meant to protect the way I did that. It's not meant to protect the fact that I had a butter knife honing away at a broom handle. It's meant to protect something more important. So it hampers our ability to pull together a campaign plan which leverages our partners and allies. So we're working through that, and we've been working it for a while. I think General Raymond was the first one that I recall actively trying to make sure we get this right and not press the easy button. And that's continued through General Saltzman. We continue to work that. But the warfighter operates in a way that we have to share information. The other thing is, I gave the example about flooding. If I can get some information that I can share with someone, a partner or ally, that they can immediately give to their local police that can save lives, that's valuable. And that's where we're working to get to, is a common understanding of what's going on in the world that is immediately releasable to anybody who needs it.
Yeah,
if that helps.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Yeah. Because we talk about it, but I'm not sure everyone quite gets it. Yeah. Well, so let's stay on that theme of allies, right? I am sure that you get a lot of exposure to various capabilities that the European defense industry and commercial space companies are developing. So how do you and your component interact with SSC when it comes to helping make allied by design system development a reality? How are we burden sharing, cost sharing, bringing everybody along all at the same time? What's your role in that?
Well, so I think this is a service initiative with General Saltzman and General Laurent has been doing a great job on that. And it is what it sounds like. You can do things a couple of ways. Like, you can do things just strictly U.S. and U.S. only, or you can open this up, architecturally and from a research standpoint to everyone. And all it means is that from the very beginning, we're looking at the entire constellation with our allies and partners in mind. And so when and how it affects me is when I'm out visiting one of our partners and allies, the very first thing I start with is their national sovereign concerns. And then we walk that back into regional concerns, and then in the case of NATO, the alliance concerns. Obviously within that are U.S. objectives and U.S. security concerns. But it's like a federated approach where you start with sovereign concerns and then you come together where there's common ground. And it builds a more resilient architecture because it allows each sovereign nation to go after their sovereign concerns on their own, but it allows us to work as a team also with interoperability and so on and so forth. So all of that is built in from the beginning and doesn't have to be worked after the fact.
And sort of without necessarily giving anything away, are we having successes in that vein? Are we seeing where sort of the Venn diagram on our interests is overlapping, such that this juice is worth the squeeze? We've
tremendous success. I think the Venn diagram overlap, I think that's always been there. I would argue that the push to burden share, that policy change has opened up the ability for us to work with our partners and allies a little differently than before. Mm-hmm. And so it has reduced the amount of time it would take to go through the process to pull them in when we do agree on a certain approach and capabilities that we need. I think it's working very well, and we're definitely moving in the right direction at a speed that I don't know if we could have done before.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah. I mean, that's really great to hear. Yeah. I feel like that. I mean, that services so many different sort of masters, if you will, of just good governance, good business, good, all the right things. So I'm excited to hear that. So we're going to keep talking about our partners, but I want to go back to the concept of, you keep mentioning education, training, and exercise. So I have this question about how we're increasingly including space effects and the contest for space effects in our theater level planning and war games. So how are you working with your staff to ensure that those types of scenarios and considerations are being rolled in to these large sort of major theater exercises and other activities, much the same way that for years and years our terrestrial-based inputs are actually happening?
Yeah.
I mean, are you getting some good feedback there? Is it actually happening?
It's working really well. The first thing we did was, here's why I keep talking about it, exercises, training, education. Before the component stood up, when we were doing exercises, there was a lack of realism associated with what space can do in a conflict, meaning that there's an active competitor on the other side trying to, remove that capability from your inventory. And so you would get a hand wave of stuff. I sat through a brief, I won't give any details, but it was a great brief. And at the end, it was a slide with a satellite in the corner that said space. And about 30% of what was required to win, the briefer was like, and space is gonna do the rest. And I was like, no, we're not doing all that. Because there's somebody else out there trying to keep us from doing that. And at that stage of the war, there's a competition going on. They're just not going to let us do that. So that's the importance of the education piece. So the first thing I told the team, we just came off of steadfast deterrence. And the first thing I told the team is that no hand waving. This will be realistic. If they don't want to protect the asset, if they don't want to ask for the requirement, if they don't want to do this, then it doesn't exist. And they're going to live with it through the exercise. And then what happened in the exercise is that one of the, and I'll just say, the air commander asked for a specific space capability. And this is the beauty of exercises. In the exercise, we went ahead and provided that support, and we highlighted, okay, no authorities for this, we're gonna have to work that. Policy change here, we're gonna have to work that. In the exercise, we're like, yeah, we can do it. In real life, that was something that would have had to gone up to the Secretary of Defense, because we haven't worked through these issues. And by the time it got to the Secretary of Defense, that conflict would have been over, people would have been dead, and that would have been the end of that.
Yeah.
And so we just highlighted that as something that we need to work on. So that's the benefit of exercises. It allows you to figure out, okay, I can't exercise this capability in real life, but in the exercise, I can get close. Like I can war game it and go through it and go, all right, this is a barrier, we're gonna have to address that. This is overclassified, we're gonna have to address that. Wow, this at the SecDef level for authorities, that probably should be at the combatant command level. That probably should be at General Grinkowitz level. We need to work that. So that's the beauty of the exercise. And it worked out well. I think for the exercise planners who are used to hand waving, they were a little frustrated with us, but the exercise itself I thought was a great success, and that's the importance of it.
Well, and I think that anecdote tells a story of a continuum of improvement. If you think back, when you and I were young CGOs and the aggressors started playing in red flags, and the space aggressors were playing in red flags and other things like that, they'd turn off GPS and everybody sat and did nothing until they said, okay, we get it, space. Turn it back on so we can have the rest of our exercise. And I appreciate that we are evolving out of that.
That's right. And that's the significant piece, is that, and again, to be fair, this is like, without the support of General Langley, General Grinkowitz, General Donahue, the component commanders, General Hines, they could have just said, we're not doing this space thing. Like, cut it back on. So, the other like 3 and 4-star component commanders have to be willing to play this out so we can improve and get better. And they've been very supportive of that, but they don't have to be.
Right. But I'm glad that they are also, because that is truly, as we saw in the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that was one of the very first things that happened was space capabilities were attacked. And so it's very realistic to actually deal with that. Now, let me ask sort of a follow-on to that. As you talk about training exercises and education, do we think that, say, for example, if the exercise that you were just referring to happens, say, 3 years from now, that based on the training and education that you'll be doing, that you've been doing, will continue to do we think we'll even have, moved the ball down the court a little more in terms of what to expect from these players?
Definitely. I think everybody's learning. For example, we're, I think in August, going out to Morocco. We did African Line in Morocco, Kenya, Nigeria. We're trying to get into Angola. We expect, hopefully, to bring them together, the African nations, into a coalition of the willing and start leveraging, supporting space. And it's the same thing on the European side. Once you have an understanding of, what are your space dependencies, then you set the groundwork for the other things you can do in space. But you first got to understand, how am I currently dependent on it? What can be taken away from me right now before you start talking about, how can I leverage it? And so we're still in the, what's my dependency? What do I need phase? I expect for both AFRICOM and EUCOM, with the way things are currently structured, in 3 years, we're going to be better at utilizing space capabilities, not just understanding it.
Yeah, I think that's important too. And, hearkening all the way back to something you said in the very beginning of our conversation about the difference between an A1C and a 1-star. Right. My guess is your 1-stars, 2-stars, 3-stars, your colonels, your chiefs, and other service equivalents, they are probably, to some extent, already getting it. The big question is are our E3s getting it, right? Do they understand? Or do they just look at their phone and go, no, it's all right here. It's all right here on my phone. Yeah. Not understanding that what it takes to make that app on that phone actually be effective.
I'll give you another example here. I'm protect the innocent on this one. So, this individual could be Army, could be Marine, could be Special Op of the ground forces. So, I needed some authorities to protect some ground forces. And I was calling this 06, and I explained to him, okay, I have this capability. You need this capability for what we're about to do, but I don't have the authorities. This is currently at the SecDef level, so I need to work this. And he was like, very respectful, but no clue. He was just like, why do I need this? And I wanted to be like, because you want to live? But I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I explained it to him, walked him through it. Okay, here's what we do. Here's why this is important. And once he got it, boom, he connected me to the right folks and we got it done. But to your point, that's our job. We, space, put ourselves in this situation where nobody understands what we do. We, space, have to get ourselves out of this situation where nobody understands what we do. And so while at times it may seem frustrating, it's important, and we have to do it. So there is General Donahue and Admiral Munch, they get it, but we have to make sure everybody understands it, to your point. Yeah.
Nice. Well, gosh, this has been great. I mean, what an awesome, insightful conversation. And now we're going to go to the part of the session where we open it up to questions from the audience. All right. Okay, so our audience, we think they know the drill by now. Aiden will call on you. Please unmute your mic then, state your name and affiliation before asking your question. Or you can submit your question using the Q&A function on the webinar. So with that, I'm going to ask Aiden who we have first.
Hey Jen, first we have Greg Hadley from Air and Space Forces magazine.
Super.
Hi General, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome, thanks so much for doing this. My question kind of builds off some of what you were talking about earlier with engagements with other countries. I'm curious, when we talk about data sharing, we often talk about what the U.S. can share with other countries. But in the course of your conversations, how much do you talk about getting data back from these other countries and putting that into a common operating picture, given that so many countries are expanding their space capabilities in Europe?
Yeah, that is a great question. So here's the way the discussions work when I'm engaging with another country. Obviously, so we have an international engagement plan that we're executing off of. And so, obviously we're there for a reason. But I usually start off by making sure I understand what they're looking for from the United States and space. Because I don't have the authorities to do everything, and I try to make sure that I have the people there to talk about any things that I don't have the authorities to support. And so the expectation always is, here's what I would like, here's what they would like, and then we turn this over to the MC, Department of State, SAF-IA, Department of the Air Force, to figure out where we can meet in the middle, where there's agreement between both nations, and that's what we execute. But it is never maybe a little strong. I am not familiar with a situation where we're giving and they're not providing. Every country is important and everybody brings something to the table that's beneficial, and we leverage all of that for a common operating picture.
Awesome. Okay, Aiden, who's next?
Next, we have a written-in question from Michael Marrow of Breaking Defense. He asks, how has Space for URAF stepped up to help plug gaps in ISR in Africa?
So that is a great question. Space brings a lot of capabilities, and right now there is high-level policy discussions that are ongoing about who's going to do what. But at the end of the day, all the capabilities are out there. What we do is we get those requirements from Africa and we plug this into the place agency or program that's best suited to provide that. But if you're getting at, are the lanes of the road clearly defined yet? Some are, some not, as you would expect after 5 years of a surface being stood up. But we'll get there. But the first thing is understanding the requirements. But we've had no issues plugging all written requirements or working towards that. If that helps.
Super. Aiden, what's next?
Stu Pettis asks, General, you have a unique background as a GO, as a former ROTC instructor as well. Can you talk about that experience and how it shaped you as a senior leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was an exec as a captain, and coming off of the exec in Minot, I got a good push from the wing commander, and I chose to do ROTC. And the reason why I chose to do ROTC is because I had a lot of mentors over the years. And in the Air Force, at least at the time, there was this view that ROTC was a career ender, so you shouldn't do it. But I felt very strongly that I needed to give back, because I just remembered all the people. By the way, Stu Pettis is one of those, and Jen is another one, who helped me over the years. And it was important for me to give it back, even if that meant it was going to hurt my career. It was just important for me to go back and teach ROTC. The good part about this is now I have these students walking around who are like lieutenant colonels, and I get to talk to them, and it's great. You get to see your investment afterwards. So, I think the Marine Corps does a good job with the training and stuff. I mean, they do a good job at a lot of stuff. But I think that's one of the things that, I would like to see a little bit more, is us taking a couple of years to go back and do some mentoring with ROTC and stuff like that. But that's why I did it. I just, because many people felt the need to invest in me, I then felt the need to invest in others. That's about as simple as it is.
Well, and clearly your career was not hurt. I would say your career has not been hurt.
Well, so that's the other thing, right? At least for me, when somebody takes the time and invests in you, it matters when it comes to doing the best you can. So maybe there would have been times that I would have given up, and I hear Jen Reeves in my ear or Stu Pettis in my ear, and I'm like, I got to keep going, right? So when you're talking to people, especially, younger, impressionable folks, I think it matters. And so I really honestly believe everything I've accomplished and will accomplish, it is because of the people who stopped and took time to help me. Like I couldn't do it on my own.
Well, and I appreciate that so much. Also, in the moment, doing ROTC, I can't imagine that it felt like some kind of sacrifice. It was a good experience, yes?
Well, you need to go for the right reason, right? You're going to help people.
Yeah.
And like anything I would argue that's worthwhile, it is a labor of love, so it wasn't a burden, but I don't want to give people the impression it was joyous. Look, all the challenges it takes me to and I got my PAO off screen here, to get me ready to talk is the same challenge with an 18-year-old. Sure. You got to be invested in the process. And so if you feel like this is going to be like a part-time thing that you're not going to put the effort towards, probably not something you want to do. But I will say, and I think this is what you're getting at, it is very rewarding.
Awesome.
It is definitely worth it.
Okay, that's great
I
to hear.
would definitely say that.
That's great. It's a labor of love.
It is.
But both love and still labor.
It is. I agree, yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, Aiden, what's next?
We have another write-in question, this time from Aaron Gibson. He asks, regarding the lack of realism in exercises with our allies and partners, to what extent have we worked with combatant commander staffs and NATO staffs to validate requirements for LVCE environments to improve the realism of training and exercises? Is there a willingness from our partners to share data to inform these models so that they're representative of actual space capabilities?
Yes. So there is a willingness, and that's not a challenge. And and as I mentioned before, all of our partners and allies have been bent over backwards, supportive and eager to understand space, incorporate space, and move forward. So that hasn't been the challenge. The challenge has been when you've been doing things for the same way for so long. Space has always been there, it just hasn't been highlighted. And so you got to change those processes where you pull it out of the background into the front because it is a target. That has been challenging because people don't know they're reliant on it. And so when you say, hey, I need to change this process because it's being targeted and may not be there, you have to walk them through that process to get them to understand what's going to happen if they don't adjust. And that takes a little time. But once you do that, it's actually fun watching the exercise play out. But there's been no resistance as far as hey, now that I understand what's going on, I still don't want to do it. We haven't had that. It's just been, I don't understand why I should do this. Okay, let me walk you through. Like the 106 I was talking about. Once he understood what I was bringing to the table, he was like, hold on, let me get you the right person. Before he understood, he was like, why do I care? Well, let me help you understand why you should care. And then we were good.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Aiden, who's next?
We have an anonymous question, but they ask, given the recent expansion of U.S. Space Force partner cooperation in Europe and Africa, including your own meeting, sir, with Turkey and Poland, how is your Space Force EURAF working to ensure that partner space capabilities are not just both interoperable with U.S. systems, but also resilient to growing threats like PNT disruption or SATCOM jamming?
Yeah, so Jen talked about this a little bit. This is the Allied by Design. So when we say Allied by Design, and I probably didn't call this out as well as I should, interoperability is inherent to Allied by Design because you have to be the work with the partners. We've been after PNT resiliency for a while, and I think we're making progress there, but we have a little ways to go. But all those things are baked into the Allied by Design. I think, from my perspective, the more challenging piece in space, I would argue, is not going to be those things that we're already tracking. It's going to be how we ingest those things that we don't know about. So right now we're transitioning from being support to air to being a warfighting command. Like we're a warfighting command right now, but that's a transition that's taking place. But we've identified a lot of the things we have to do. We're just getting after it. At some point, we're gonna be at a steady state, and we're gonna get something new from the adversary we haven't thought about. How are we gonna deal with those? The things that we don't know, like those known unknowns. But the things that the question just covered, that's General Saltzman has that covered. General Garant has that covered. Interoperability, P&T, the stuff we know about. The next generation of things are going to be a lot better than what we have now.
Cool. That's good to hear. Okay. Hayden, what's next?
We have a question from Arthur Martin. He asks, Sir, you talked about the relationship between your command and other components. How is that cross-COCOM coordination being exercised and tested to identify and fix any potential seams that might exist?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So here's what we did. The first thing we did when I came in, and credit to Colonel Max Lance for this, is campaign plan was written, space component stood up, and there's no space annex because we didn't exist. So the very first thing that you do is that we were very tied to air. General Hines and General Hecker had a very good understanding of what we brought to the table, and so that one was fairly easy. The other components, we were not part of the Department of the Navy or Department of the Army. And so we send a team out and work with their, in the case of both the Army, Navy, and Marines, to work with their threes and their planning teams to figure out, okay, let me take a look at what you want to do, and let's identify where you need space to do it. And in some cases, they knew, and in some cases they didn't. And then those requirements that they needed became my requirements. And so we wrote those up as my requirement on behalf of them, because that's what they need to execute the campaign plan. And so what I tell folks is that if we're doing something that doesn't support the mission of the campaign plan, then we're wrong. It's not our job. There's a headquarters back there that's doing a great job. The intelligence community is doing a great job. Our job is warfighting and those warfighting requirements, and that's what we get after. And so we just work with them, and we documented that, and we submitted it through the normal process of the IPL from the component command. For the combat command.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for probably one more question.
Okay.
Our final question is from Stephen Clark of Ars Technica. He asks, to the degree that you can talk about this, can you discuss how the full exploitation of GPS M-code and anti-jam will be useful in your AOR once the GPS OCX ground system is fully operational?
To the extent that I can. So here's what I am willing to say. There's obviously a heavy reliance on PNT during peacetime, and as you would imagine, during conflict, any type of conflict. The more we can do in the acquisition process to prevent folks who don't share our view from disrupting our way of life, the better it is for everybody. And that's what this system has always been designed from the beginning to do. I think it's going to be very effective at getting after that. But I am unwilling to get after the technical reason of why I'm confident that this is the right path.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one day with all the declassification.
Yeah.
But it's important that it's classified right now, because it's a good capability that we are hoping to exploit.
We drew the line right on that one.
There we did. Okay, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this Schriever Spacepower series. Thanks again to Brigadier General Middleton for not only taking the time to speak with us today, but for making this trip all the way from Europe. We really appreciate that. And for all of us at MI Space, have a great space power kind of day.